This is the Miller Report from the Birch Gold Group. Hi, I'm Mark Allen. We're going to talk about some really fascinating topics today with our guest, Philip Patrick from the Birch Gold Group, along with Will Hart, join us here at our Miller Report studios. Gentlemen, welcome to the Miller Report.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, thank you.
Hi. We're going to talk today about something known as FATCA, F-A-T-C-A. That actually stands for the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and I believe it goes into effect in weeks, really, July 1st.
You are absolutely correct, Mark. It comes into effect July 1st. What it is, it requires any Americans with more than $50,000 in foreign assets to report them essentially to the IRS on an annual basis.
So if somebody has money, I'm going to say stashed away in the Cayman Islands, more than $50,000, or in a Swiss bank account, they're required now by this new act to report that they have that money there.
Absolutely correct. It requires individuals to report back to the IRS, and it actually puts a lot of pressure on foreign financial institutions to adhere to these laws, and I think that's where a lot of the issues are coming from.
How are they putting pressure on these foreign banks? How does the United States have jurisdiction, say, over a bank in the Cayman Islands or Switzerland?
Absolutely. So basically, banks are going to be required by the United States law to provide account balances, total assets, account numbers, transactions, and we don't know how other countries are going to deal with that. Are they going to respect that? There might be some pushback.
The pushback from the foreign banks.
Absolutely, and I think that's the biggest concern that a lot of people have. Nobody knows how this is going to eventually play out.
Does the U.S. have any pushback themselves if these foreign banks don't comply?
Absolutely, yeah. They can be subject to penalties as high as 30%. So certainly there's pushback there.
Explain that, Philip. In other words, if they have interest rates on 30%, once they find that, John Smith has money in their bank, they can be dinged, they can be fined that kind of percentage.
Absolutely correct, yeah. And not only that, I mean, that's talking about banks that don't comply. Even for banks to comply, it is a logistical nightmare. They're suggesting that costs on the private sector are actually going to dwarf any amount of additional U.S. tax revenue here in the United States. And a lot of foreign banking institutions now are suggesting they could divest from U.S. assets altogether rather than bearing this cost.
Wow. Will, what is your take?
Again, this is such an unknown. This has never happened, ever. And so a lot of people believe this could be the tipping point where countries may say, you know what, we don't respect the dollar, and we already see how people are kind of shying away in other countries with the U.S. dollar. This may be something that may put pressure on the world reserve currency.
We know that China and other countries are divesting themselves of dollars. We'll talk about how that affects us here in the United States in a moment. They're investing more in precious metals. China is just one. A lot of companies and even educational institutions are divesting themselves of dollars, going into gold and silver and other precious metals. How do you think this is going to affect the dollar itself? I mean, we in the United States want a strong buck.
It has huge implications, not only for the dollar, but the bond market and the stock market as well. Currently, we've got more than 21 trillion of foreign capital invested in American assets and markets, with about 10 trillion of that being in the stock market alone.
And what about the bond market? I mean, not in terms of numbers, but how is that going to affect the bond market?
Look, ultimately, this is just detracting from the attractiveness of the United States in terms of a hub for investment. And at a time like this, that's the last thing that we need. I think this is really stepping over dollars to pick up cents long term.
I'm going to ask you both, is it common for investors to invest in foreign countries, in other countries? We know that other countries invest here. You just said that.
Of course.
And
absolutely.
so investors here invest there. Does that work?
Absolutely correct. Yeah. I mean, of course.
Right. And so this is going to, in my thoughts is what you're saying is that it's going to take the dollar and drive the value of the dollar down.
Possibly.
Ultimately, it certainly could have that effect.
One thing is that we do know is this request by the United States government to these foreign countries, it potentially violates their own country's laws and constitutions. So we're asking for them to do things that they normally do not do.
It's against their local laws and regulations.
Absolutely.
Correct. I mean, certain countries are very reliant on the banking system for their economy, Switzerland being a very good example.
I was just thinking of Switzerland.
And they have certain privacy laws in Switzerland that make it a very attractive haven for assets abroad. And unfortunately, we're asking them to do things that aren't beneficial for their own economy.
This is the Miller Report. We're talking about FATCA, F-A-T-C-A, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And Will, I understand you have a good analogy for explaining this to people.
Well, the analogy that I like to give people, it really pertains to a situation that you find yourself in and an alternative to what you may be able to do. I kind of look at the situation we are here with the government as being on the Titanic. And let's say you and I, Mark, are on the Titanic and we're playing shuffleboard and we feel a rumbling on the side of the ship. We look over, we see an iceberg just left a gaping hole. Water's rushing in. Two options take place. One, we either just continue our game and hope everything's okay, or we make our way to a lifeboat, paddle out 100 yards, and wait and see what happens. If they end up fixing the hole and everything works out fine, they'll wave us back on board. We'll go back on the board and everything will be fine. But if the ship ends up sinking and we see thousands of people frantically panicking, looking for lifeboats, we're going to be grateful that we're over in something else that's possibly outside the dollar.
And as you know, I don't swim very well, so I would not. When we're doing all this, when we're watching this unfold, it's anticipated that the dollar will fall. The value of the dollar will fall.
That is what they're saying.
And that is what they're saying. What can we as investors do to either beef up that buck or get out of the dollar?
Well, one option certainly is precious metals. Metals, gold, silver, platinum, palladium, they're outside the dollar. They are global. They're not tied to the greenback. So again, moving into something that's been around for 5,000 years is certainly an option.
And there is nothing, as I understand, that's backing up that greenback anymore. We're off the gold standard.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Look, I think precious metals allow you to hedge yourself just a little bit. And in a climate like this, when we have reserve currency status under threat, when our currency long term is looking less attractive, it seems like a good idea to take a prudent step.
So let's take a look at this. With FATCA coming, it's weeks away. Why should I invest in gold? Why should an investor take this opportunity to invest in gold?
Sure, I'll kind of feel that one. So basically, the concern, of course, is nobody knows this outcome. How are countries going to react? Could it be potentially the end of our fiat currency, of the world reserve currency? Nobody knows. These are uncharted territories, and so with precious metals, again, you're not just sticking with one thing. If the dollar does end up having issues, and you've got a pile of gold and silver, you're kind of protected there, at least from a further devaluating dollar or possibly a failure of the dollar.
So that actually what you're doing is preserving your spending power,
Correct.
Your buying power, your living power by investing in gold, because gold ostensibly is going to go back up.
It very well could.
Or at least stay where it is.
Exactly.
Right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Phil, did you have something else to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think everything Will said is absolutely correct. He touched upon something with regards to a loss of reserve currency status, and I think that's key to this as well. We are making it less attractive every single day to have the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Legislation like this only really pushes to accelerate that. If that were to happen, it is very, very difficult to come back from that. So I think putting together a prudent hedge within a portfolio is a very good idea at this time.
The word hedge, we've used that, a hedge against inflation. Now this is a hedge against the valuation of the dollar.
Absolutely correct.
So that precious metals of all kinds can help preserve the buying power of the buck.
Correct. Yeah. There's got to be a reason why countries around the world, Russia, China, India, are stockpiling gold in their central banks. I don't think they're doing it because they have nothing else to do. I think they see around the corner before you and I even see the corner.
And of course, what we can do is take advantage of what they're doing.
Correct.
As individual investors and basically copy their strategy.
Follow the smart money.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. On our next program, we're going to be talking about your IRA, your retirement funds, and the potential confiscation of those. They've done that in Poland, and they're possibly thinking about doing that in the U.S., nationalizing retirement funds. We'll be talking about that on the next edition of the Miller Report. This has been the Miller Report from the Birch Gold Group. We invite you to ask us questions by writing us an email at info@birchgold.com. That's info@birchgold.com. Visit us on our website, of course. Lots of great information there. That's at birchgold.com, birchgold.com, or call one of our gold specialists. You can talk one-on-one by calling 800-355-2116. That number again is 800-355-2116. I'm Mark Allen. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on our next edition. Bye-bye for now.